As the leader of an authoritarian political system, Emperor Palpatine rejects the ideas of democracy and political plurality. Instead of letting opposition voices and political organizations thrive in the Imperial Senate, he sends his attack dogs and various security agencies to silence all dissent. This is very typical behavior for an authoritarian regime, and that's because most of these regimes are driven by the fear of what they cannot control. Just look at Adolf Hitler's irrational obsession with racial and genetic purity. We know about his desire to sterilize groups he deemed undesirable, like Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies. But from the beginning of the Third Reich's reign, he also attempted to sterilize individuals with a wide variety of what were assumed to be hereditary traits, like physical deformities, chronic alcoholism, schizophrenia, epilepsy, and dementia. None of this was backed by a complete scientific understanding of how these disorders were passed from one generation to another. But that was typical of Hitler's decision-making process. It was based on a lot of hysteria and fantastical visions, but usually short on substance. Like his concept of the Aryan race, which actually has a lot less to do with the Germanic people and is much more closely associated to peoples who lived in northern India and in ancient Persia. Ultimately, Hitler was a deranged and charismatic individual who was able to convince the masses that the monsters and shadows that haunted his reality were actually real. But in order to maintain that control, the iron grip on their people, an authoritarian must ultimately share power. No single man is powerful enough to rule the galaxy all by themselves. And the Empire, despite its brand new gray-plated Star Destroyers, was just a thinly wrapped authoritarian veneer around the bureaucratic structure of the Republic. Major reforms still needed to be put in place to transform the Empire into Palpatine's final vision. The old Palpatine, the one we see as Senator Naboo, would have been better suited for this job. During the Republic era, Palpatine was known as a charismatic political operator who kept his true political views hidden and always found a way to compromise and work with other people. In a lot of ways, he was a power broker, a political organizer within the Senate, which is how he was able to leverage Chancellor Valoram's vote of no confidence into a run for the chancellorship office. When Palpatine still accepted that there were opposition powers he had to respect and a system and a set of rules he needed to follow, he was actually at his best and able to accomplish the most. And Palpatine's power during the Republic period didn't really come directly from him. It came from a coalition of allies that he had developed and nurtured relationships with, including some very powerful senators like Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and Padme Amidala. These are all members of the Loyalist Committee, but when Palpatine revealed his true self, they would ultimately turn against him. Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com. Right now, if you guys purchase a replica lightsaber, you can get 2 free Padawan sabers of your choice. All sabers need to have the same category soundboard. Don't miss out on this amazing deal and definitely check out ownersaber.com. They have one of the best collections of lightsabers on this side of the Hydian Way. And all kyber crystals are guaranteed to be free of dark side spirits and the more mellow but equally as annoying ideologically confused gray Jedi spirits who can oftentimes make their owners more indecisive. If you guys aren't interested in that special, you can also use our promo code TECH, that's all caps, for another 20% off of your purchase. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Now, in the last episode of The Bad Batch, we finally get to see what happened to Vice Admiral Admiral Rampart, a very important player in the first season of the show. Unlike Palpatine's former allies in the Senate, Vice Admiral Rampart is very aligned with Palpatine's galactic view. His fall from grace and internment in an Imperial labor camp that's not all that different from the one Jyn Erso landed in is not a good sign for the Empire. Let's say you do believe that an authoritarian government is the optimal way to run a society. That living beings by nature are too chaotic and need a certain amount of central government control and regulation. You can either create a super intelligent computer that watches over, monitors, and controls everything we do. It's basically the Matrix, and I'm sure not even Palpatine wants that. Or you can try to control everything through the state, and by the state I mean a large collection of bureaucrats and underlings who you can trust to wield power. If you're going to attempt that second scenario, you're actually going to want as many Admiral Ramparts as possible, true believers who are competent. Let's not forget how capable this young naval officer was. The first project he takes on is the Chain Code Project. This finally created a form of identification for all citizens of the Empire. This simple act was designed to bring billions, if not trillions, of citizens who might have been living on the fringes of Republic society into the Imperial record-keeping books. This allowed the Empire to better reallocate resources to places where they're needed, or more realistically, keep track of where everyone is. Vice Admiral Rampart was smart enough to realize that most people would not just volunteer for such a program, and so he tied the conversion of Republic credits to galactic credits to the Chain Code program, so that everyone was essentially forced to enroll anyway. It's a brilliant idea, and you kind of want someone brilliant in charge of such a large galactic-wide project. The fact that Rampart was able to accomplish this with such speed and efficiency is very impressive. Palpatine didn't just need military leaders, he needed capable project managers as well, and Vice Admiral Rampart was young, energetic, resourceful, smart, and most importantly, very dedicated to the cause. The next project he would be assigned to would be War Mantle. This was an extremely important initiative to replace the clone troopers with Imperial conscripts or volunteer soldiers. We're learning that Rampart will be working beneath Moff Wilhup Tarkin, who is very much the right-hand man of the Emperor. Tarkin was given free rein to bounce around from one high-value Imperial project to another and provided assistance whenever possible. Or at least that's how it worked in theory. A lot of fans of the Empire don't get that Emperor Palpatine cared very little about the Empire and its more earthly pursuits of political domination and a massive state security apparatus. Palpatine at his core was really just an evil space wizard. He was focused on very fantastical things that happened in another dimension, in other realms. Every partnership he made, every individual he helped, this entire empire he built was all designed to serve his own end goals and purposes, which was to become as powerful as possible in the Force. Now, there was probably a time when Palpatine was more sane and had a clear vision of what he wanted to do and had more realistic goals and expectations. But at one point, he just became a madman, way too ambitious for his own good, and years of absorbing dark side energy probably scrambled his brains. Palpatine was really at his peak of power when the Republic was a hybrid democracy. You could even call it a managed democracy. At this point, Palpatine had a great deal of control over a very robust political and economic system full of talented, dedicated, and independently minded people, very similar to Vice Admiral Rampart. When the Empire rose, he replaced this system of individuals with lapdogs and yes-men, like Tarkin. The harder Palpatine squeezed his fists around the Empire, the more talented people fled, until finally, when Palpatine had complete control, the only people that were around were the Sith Eternal, a weird cult full of followers who lacked any autonomy. I digress. Back to the Imperial period, to War Mantle and Rampart. When speaking about his new program, it's clear that Rampart is a smooth operator. He knows how to hook in his target audience, who he's selling the program to, that's Tarkin, but he also knows how to placate his competition, the Kaminoans.
A strong ruling government requires an increase in soldiers to maintain order throughout the galaxy.
Our facilities are fully capable of creating more clones for the task.
Sustaining such a vast engagement is not one clones must do alone.
And it's a really good, solid plan here. As a matter of fact, it's really the only plan that the Empire has if they want to get rid of the clones, but also maintain some kind of overlapping security presence during the transition. Take conscripts and volunteers and train them with veteran clones.
Imagine more squads like this being trained by skilled clones. Together, they would make a formidable army.
Rampart is driven by his ambition, and that is perfectly lined up with his love for the Empire and allows him to wield his very capable mind in fulfilling this task. It's kind of a win-win for the Empire and also for him. Notice how he also tries to make Crosshair feel like he's a part of this program. I think Rampart is very keen to not make the clones feel like they're going to be replaced. He at least initially recognizes the threat of a clone mutiny and how damaging that could be for the Imperial military. Whereas Palpatine and Tarkin probably are so insulated from criticism and opposition that they don't really care about little details like this, which is what makes them really poor project managers. Now, if there is one problem with Rampart, it's that he's a true believer. He actually really has, drunken the Kool-Aid that Palpatine has provided for the galaxy.
The loyalty of those who willingly enlist is what I see tremendous value in.
Spoken like a rich elite from Coruscant who has no idea what the average Imperial citizen needs and what motivates them. It's probably something very simple like food. So yeah, Vice Admiral Rampart is a bit naive about how he views the Empire and how the average person views the Empire, and that is going to be a huge problem for him later on. But still, despite his lack of experience, when placed in real-world situations, Vice Admiral Rampart is able to use his cunning to succeed. When placed in control of the Imperial garrison on Ryloth, Vice Admiral Rampart must somehow maintain the peace but also crack down on the growing dissent amongst the civilian population. To make matters worse for Rampart, his partner in his effort to stabilize Ryloth is former revolutionary Cham Syndulla. Cham's Twilight resistance owes its success over the Separatists thanks to the clone army and their Jedi leaders. For now, he's agreed to talk to his people and try to limit their subversive activity, which was just a response to the Empire's new restrictions on the planet. But it's not clear if this Twilight leader will continue on this path of cooperation. Rampart is smart to realize that, first, the elected leader of the Twilight people, Senator Orn Free Taa, was not respected by the general populace. He was seen as a compromised individual who spent more time on Coruscant with the elites than in Lesu City with his people. Cham Syndulla, despite holding no real political title, was the real leader of the planet. He had bled for the Twilight people. And it's very clear to Rampart that Cham Syndulla would not go along with his real objective, which was to start a massive dunium mining operation on the planet, which would inevitably use Twi'lek slave labor. The real struggle here was to maintain peace on Ryloth until the Empire was ready to just completely take over. Vice Admiral Rampart really depended on Cham Syndulla's popularity and support to stave off any uprising against Imperial rule. But he was under no illusion that, in the long run, Cham Syndulla would not turn against them. And so the best way for Admiral Rampart to handle Cham Syndulla now is to somehow turn the people against him. The problem is Cham Syndulla was actually sick of fighting, and he actually wanted to raise his family in a world at peace. And so he cooperated with the Empire. But once intel is collected that Cham's own daughter, Hera Syndulla, and his former partisan fighters are stockpiling weapons, Rampart makes his move. He sweeps up Hera Syndulla with an Imperial patrol and captures her, which forces Cham Syndulla into attacking the Empire. In the ensuing showdown between Cham Syndulla and the Vice Admiral, Rampart actually has Crosshair shoot Senator Orn Free Taa, but frames Syndulla for the attack. The two were known as political rivals. And now Cham Syndulla is branded as an assassin, which really does hurt his image. Vice Admiral Rampart clearly knows what he's doing. Ultimately, Rampart was placed in charge of 3 widely different assignments. One dealing with bureaucracy and large government systems, one dealing with creating a military force out of nothing, and third, pacifying dissidents on an occupied planet. The fact that he was successful in these 3 very different scenarios is impressive. He's exactly what you want in your empire, especially in a leadership position. Now, if Vice Admiral Rampart had one weakness, it's perhaps his lack of respect for the clones that served beneath them. They would ultimately undermine everything he worked for, which is actually kind of fitting, seeing as he created the replacement program for the clones. First, Rampart underestimates Captain Hauser's loyalty to the Empire, and because of that, the clone is able to help Cham Syndulla and his family escape from Imperial custody. And then, when placed in charge of destroying Tipica City, the home of all clones in the Grand Army of the Republic, Vice Admiral Rampart failed to somehow realize that the clone officers on his bridge would have any feelings towards this brutal act. And so, it would be clone whistleblowers from Vice Admiral Rampart's own flagship who would reveal that Kamino wasn't destroyed by a massive storm, but was actually destroyed after Vice Admiral Rampart ordered its destruction. Now, obviously, Rampart was just following orders from Wilhelm Tarkin, but when the gig is up, it would be Vice Admiral Rampart who is thrown beneath the bus. Now, I understand the Empire's need to protect itself from mistakes like this, but the reality is Vice Admiral Rampart is a very capable individual, far more capable than Wilhelm Tarkin, and this whole scenario with the destruction of Tipica City is Tarkin's fault. The man is basically afraid of everything, and when you're afraid of everything, you just want to destroy everything, and you don't really focus on the consequences of destroying entire planets. And there are always consequences. As a matter of fact, if we take a look at Tarkin, he spent his entire career leeching off the success of other promising individuals, like Vice Admiral Rampart. And usually he would take credit for all of their work after killing them. That's exactly what Tarkin did with Director Krennic and his Death Star program. If you're gonna implement your own hierarchy of leadership that's gonna replace the existing kind of structure of leadership, you have to find some really competent people to serve as your second in charge. Wilhelm Tarkin is not that guy. The problems of the Empire might be varied, but now I'm beginning to suspect that actually Wilhelm Tarkin is at the center of everything. Palpatine depended on Tarkin as a gatekeeper for talent. But rather than nurturing promising candidates who can serve Palpatine in the future, Wilhelm Tarkin has instead destroyed anyone capable of doing anything over his own fears of losing power to other people. In a lot of ways, Palpatine selects Tarkin for this role because Tarkin is a lot like Palpatine, and that is also the fucking problem. And it's completely because of people like Tarkin why the Empire is ultimately doomed, and will be unable to attract the same level of talent and skills that the opposition has. Even the most brutal dictators throughout history had allies. They had special individuals they protected that were in their inner circle that could not be touched. You even have dictators who would basically ally themselves with entire factions, minority groups in the populace, and give them special treatment so they can help the dictator in charge oppress everyone else. Palpatine didn't really do this at all. It was just all chaos. An empire, when run successfully, depends heavily on clean-cut, highly intelligent and disciplined officers like Rampart. Individuals like Rampart are usually the only ones benefiting from the Imperial system. And so finding someone like him in a brig, rotting away next to some Ugnaughts, is further proof that the Empire is completely unsustainable and run by a bunch of chaotic ass clowns.